Today on Podcast Them Down, we learn how to forge the steel. Welcome to Podcast Them Down. I'm Tim Regan from U.S. power metal band Burning Shadows, Fade to Black Metallica tribute, Dual-Violin folk metal band ISENMOR, and recently vacated Graves True Zombie Metal. Be sure to subscribe, like, or follow. And now, on with the show. All right, I'm joined by Mike from ISENMOR and recently vacated Graves True Zombie Metal. We're going to talk about the songwriting process. So Mike and I wrote quite a few songs over the years, and if you ask me right now, how do you write a song? I have no answer for you. So, you sit down and write the song, and then when it's done, you record the song. That's how.
Right.
All right, the end. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, there we go.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I pitched the idea for this show because so for one, I think Tim and I have very different songwriting processes. You know what I mean? Like I think the way you and I approach songwriting is very different. And I find that kind of fascinating, and I find a lot of this very fascinating. So for the most succinct way I can think to put my approach to songwriting is that I have to invent a concept and then get completely up my own ass about it in order for the song to come out the way that I want it to. So I have to have some grand, stupid idea. And the thing is, what I love about this is if I heard any other musician talking about that, I'd be like, oh, whatever. Like, yeah, sure. But for whatever reason, this helps me do my thing. And I find this super fascinating. I think it sounds like, and I know we've sat down and wrote a bunch of songs together. Pardon me. But it sounds like you listen to a lot of bands for inspiration, so you'll figure out like
that is true. Yes.
Yeah. So you might listen to Nile, like you're trying to make like a super fast.
Right. So you just listen to a band for a while, and then it just kind of colors what you jam on. If you're just noodling, then you can kind of develop something from there. Yeah. So the song "No More Room in Hell" on the first RVG album, True Zombie Metal, I think that was the last song that was written for the album, and I ended up with 2 obituary CDs in my car. And so I was driving around they were the only CDs in my car. And keep in mind, this was, oh shit. Well, that's upsetting. It was 17 years ago. I'm driving around, 2 obituary CDs in my car. And so I listened to them constantly because that was the only option. And I was like, oh, I need a last song for the album. And that's why No More Room in Hell sounds like obituary, because it was it osmosed into me. So I think it's very obvious what I was listening to at the time when I write songs, but often people are surprised when I tell them.
See, usually when you're like, I was listening to Nile, and you throw something, because there was a song on RVG's most recent EP that was literally titled, like its working title was like Nile.
That's right.
When I
had to sit down and figure out what song that is. I lost track. I lost the bubble on all the working titles.
Yeah. When I heard it, I was like, yeah, that's clearly Nile. Right. Like usually when you have like a working title like that, it's very obvious to me. It's like, okay, yeah, I can totally hear the inspiration. No, like, so Tim writes the absolute majority of RBG. RBG is definitely
it's the vast majority.
Yeah, it's your baby through and through. I've contributed like a little bit, like not much at all. I think like parts of a song and then like a riff here and there, sorts of shit.
Well, RBG is the pile that everything goes into. You know.
But it's interesting. Like, I think I tend to overthink songs a lot. And there's some argument that I'm very pleased with the output of ISENMOR, which, and we can get to that in a minute, where I had I had much more involvement in the writing of ISENMOR's EP through the album release.
So everything, if you're keeping score at home, that would be literally everything.
Right.
And plus Saxon Shore.
But I've had much less involvement with RBG, but I think RBG's written like way more shit since I've been involved in it. Because
it's easy to write RBG. Like I can't really explain it, but I was saying earlier, just sit down and write it. I can literally do that for RBG. there's like a local minimum in the fretboard, and that's where my fingers go, and that's how RBG happens. It's like it just exists biologically within me to turn it on and spit out RBG.
Nice.
And that goes along with the whole brain. Zombies like have the lower brain function. So never second guess an RBG riff. That's the other thing. It's probably right the first time you do it. This is not true for anything else I do.
But yeah, like I really like comparing RBG versus ISENMOR. So ISENMOR's thing, in addition to the fact that it's two violins, I think, is that it's ridiculously dense. Like everybody who's mixed ISENMOR despises it at the end, because there's typically at least 7 instruments doing.
Let's go through the instrumentation real quick.
Yeah, so there's 2 guitars.
As the person who mixed the album, I absolutely hate it. So 2 guitars, at least. Sometimes there's a lead on top of those.
Yeah, and so there's actually 4 guitar parts in the album. I don't know that they all made it on there, but
Oh, I'm sure they did.
Yeah. So there's 2 guitars, 2 violins, bass, keys, often multiple keys, drums, and then vocals. But the vocals it's not just screams. There's frequently 2, 3, and 4 part harmonies. So it's just stupidly dense.
And there's multiple screams, which I had to handle differently.
Yeah.
So there's high, mid, and low screams as well. And there were gang vocals.
So it's just too much, right? But the thing about I'm much more heavily involved, or I was much more heavily involved in the existing ISENMOR tracks, and I really, really like this. My 2 favorite bands ever are Green Carnation and Devin Townsend, and Devin Townsend and his various projects. But both of them have pretty simple instrumentation, but complex arrangements, I think. Devin Townsend especially. Green Carnation is a little bit more Spartan in that aspect, I think, but they have more of like they know how to make everything sound massive and then go away from it and then come back. Like they know how to use what they have to very good effect. And then Devin Townsend just has layers and layers and layers of shit going on at all times. And then I just like, I frankly just like the sound of harmonized guitars. So I basically try to like mesh all this shit when I write together. And I think the result is that like ISENMOR songs tend to take longer to write because there's a lot of second. I think when you write this way, you have to be very careful about when to let something shine because since there's like 7 things happening at any given moment, it's like, okay, do we really need a guitar harmony and a violin harmony and keys here, or do we need to like do something simple and let something else kind of stand out, or is it just like the sum of all of its parts? But this is the way I think about songwriting. This is like this is too much. And I guess I just generally find the idea of contrasting approaches differently because I think I've talked to a lot of people about like how do you write songs. So Pete in ISENMOR, he's got a band, Intentional Trainwreck, and he had a episode not too long ago where I think I asked about the songwriting process because I'm curious about that sort of thing, and they've got a lot of room for just like fuck around. Like we're gonna put together a skeleton, and you go do a solo and do your thing, and this is room for your solo, and it's just it's a very different way. I remember looking up what's the name? Animals as Leaders. And regardless of how you feel about them, I'm not the hugest fan of Gent. I like Animals as Leaders.
It's pronounced Dient.
Dient.
It's Swedish.
The Gigigent. So I was reading that a lot of the stuff that they do is that they like write in the DAW. So they, in DAW being digital audio workstation, so they have like a DAW software like Cubase or Reaper, and they'll write, record, write, record, write, record, and then their songs kind of spawn this way. And I've often thought about trying to use different processes for different feels. Because I used to write in the DAW as well, but for ISENMOR, everything is much more calculated. So things typically come out in software. Like we use Guitar Pro to write ISENMOR.
Not a sponsor.
Before. Not.
If a Robust Music wants to sponsor us.
Hey, come on.
You can at me.
So, I felt like I wrote a certain way in the DAW that maybe I don't write in as much with Guitar Pro. And I haven't really had the opportunity to experiment with that as much as I'd like, mainly because having twin toddlers makes it very difficult.
It's always twins
hobbies
with you. You ever notice that?
Yeah, I know. Just kids. Twins. But yeah, so the next thing I want to do is honestly just try to literally compare and contrast, like how do I write in the DAW versus Guitar Pro versus some mixture of the two, because I do think the output is different. But yeah, like I think RVG is pretty much typically written in Guitar Pro before anything else.
Yeah. It's
Though you riff on it a bit, right?
Yeah, but it's pretty much whatever goes into Guitar Pro ends up being the song. And it generally follows a intro, riff, chorus type structure, just nothing too out of the box, except for, see, this is the problem, except for when it doesn't, and
some of the songs on the new EP, I think, are pretty unusually structured.
Yeah, it's a good example of when I just didn't do it that time. It's different now. So, one I remember writing one of the songs on Consumed by Death, and that's the one where the tempo, time signature, and key changes for every riff.
Oh, God.
And that was like a challenge I was giving myself. It's like, all right, you come up with a riff, and then the next one can't share anything with that riff. It has to be totally different. I think that song is called Vlach or something like that. So
there was a okay, this is complete non-related. There was a software I was using briefly. I believe it's Git Kraken. So it's just your programmer. It's just like a visualizer for Git source control. And I think when they were getting started, they put out a contest. I think it was Git Kraken about like, oh, we want like a theme song, so we're gonna have like a song contest. And it's like we're partial to rap, and I never ended up following through with this. But I thought this idea was so stupid that I started trying to put together like a death metal song that was ridiculously complex. So yeah, I was trying to do the same thing where it was like a different time signature every measure or every riff.
Find the downbeat. Find the downbeat.
but in my head, the whole thing was like, here's this thing that's like fucking unlistenable. I want this to be, and it would have been so much work for no purpose for me. But in that moment, I found it very amusing.
So another song I can give insight into is Sarnath by Burning Shadows. And that one, most of the verse, chorus, and pre-chorus structure, so I came up with a riff. So, like, where that riff comes from, I can't tell you. Like, I don't know. I can't articulate it. But, so you come up with a riff. And then I made it different for the next part. So in the song, the verse is based in E, and then for the pre-chorus, I was like, well, I'll go to A, and so there's a variation of the main theme on a different string, and then it goes back to the original string, and then the chorus is another variation. So like everything's kind of similar but different, and then you sandwich that between the intro idea, and then the interlude is totally different, and then the solo is totally different, and then you come back to the original idea, and then the outro is totally different. So where all those ideas came from, I don't know, but I like a lot of the meat of that song was just, here's a riff, how can I vary it to keep it interesting?
It's a leitmotif, basically.
Yes. you get a ding. So and I think another song that kind of went that way, a little less complex, though, was Legions of Decay by Recently Vacated Graves.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. I guess I can see that.
It's a main idea that gets kind of varied a bit.
Mm-hmm. So to completely nerd out for a second, and I mean true deep nerdity.
How can you nerd past leitmotif? I mean,
so in Undertale,
let's find out. Let's find out.
There's a video game called Undertale.
You lost me.
So the interesting thing about Undertale is that
isn't under the tail the butt?
yes. This game it's a game entirely about.
It's about the butt.
It's about butts. Okay. Well, let me go off on one more tangent before we get to what I was going to say. Okay.
I'm going to need a map to get back to the conversation.
Yeah. We have this like board book, like a kid's board book of Alice in Wonderland, and there's one page. It's not really like involved. It's just kind of like a summary, basically, that you can just kind of talk to, and it's kind of fun to read. But me and my daughters were reading it, and one of the pages has 3 potions on it. And one of them says "drink me," and the other say like "blah." So my one daughter's asking me, "It's like, what does this do?" It's like the good one. It's like, "Oh, that's the one you're supposed to drink." And it's like, "What does this do?" And I have no idea. Like, the other 2 are bad. It's like, geez, I'm not sure. So she asked me a few times, just being silly, and then eventually I say, "Okay, this turns you into a walking, talking butt." And she's like, "What?" And she's clearly amused. And she goes to the other one. Like, what's that? So that turns you into a double walking, talking butt. That's what it does. So
Very
okay,
good, very good.
So this happens at night, and the next morning, it's Saturday. So we're trying to sleep a little bit as they run around until we kind of can't do it anymore, and we have to actually get up. And I noticed that my daughter is singing to the tune of "Where is Thumbkin?" Walking, talking butt, and then my wife comes over and says, "Mike, she told me that you taught her walking, talking butt." Yes, yes, I did.
You're in trouble.
That's my fault.
It talks.
Oh, that was awesome.
Good job. I need a slow clap on here.
Yeah.
If you're keeping track, I need a vomit sound and a slow clap sound.
Okay.
We'll see if I ever get them.
So Undertale, the butt. The creator of Undertale is actually a composer, first and foremost. So one of the things about Undertale is that the music written for Undertale is actually pretty spectacular. I mean, it's video game music. I don't mind video game music. I think it can be pretty cool, and he did a really good job. But one of the things that underpins Undertale is leitmotifs. There's tons and tons and tons and tons of leitmotifs that ride throughout the whole game, to the point where almost every song is a variation of something else. And it's interesting because you don't notice it on the first playthrough necessarily, and then you start listening a little bit more. You're like, oh, yeah, okay, I get it. You can do surprising amounts of things with varying a riff, or varying a melody, to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
So like I'm sure many guitarists, have a mountain of riffs I wrote during all the COVID lockdown stuff. So mountain of riffs. I don't know if they're any good because when working on a song, usually you want to get together and jam on it and make sure it sounds good. So that's actually, I think, the stage we're at now, because we've been getting together again to rehearse or practice or work on songs as of the recording of this episode. So, and now we're taking all these piles of riffs that have accumulated and sitting down and kind of go, does this feel right? So that's the strategy we've been going with recently, which isn't something I've had to do before. Usually the time between writing a song and learning it and playing it with people is pretty short. So the evolution is somewhat quick. But now I have year-old stuff, probably more than year-old stuff, of I don't even know what I was thinking when I came up with it for a lot of it. So I'm prepared for not me, of course, but other bands just releasing total crap post-pandemic. It's like here's a bunch of stuff we wrote that we don't know if it's any good, but we had to release something. I'm expecting that to happen. Hopefully I'll be proven wrong. But, I know this is an unfair example, but Liquid Tension Experiment 3 was recorded during COVID, but, it, that's not a fair example. Because they can just walk in and create gold and leave, and they've done it in a week.
So it's actually an interesting thing you brought up, though. So a lot of what, sorry,
yeah, you better be sorry.
So a lot of the songwriting process for me is listening to stuff that I've written and trying to convince myself that I do or do not despise it entirely. So the song "Battle Scarred" on ISENMOR was probably the two songs that were the hardest to come together on ISENMOR's Shield Brother, I think, were "Battle Scarred" and "Shield Brother."
I know for a fact "Drink to Glory" wrote itself.
Yeah, "Drink to Glory" was pretty much just done.
That was like an afternoon. It was done and done.
But like "Battle Scarred," I think I came up with everything up to the first chorus, and then it started kind of going off the rails a bit, and it was very difficult to get it where it didn't bore me at a certain point. And it took like a year or more, and then finally Tim wrote, like you wrote I keep talking to the audience, but we're supposed to be talking to each other.
Whatever.
But you wrote that interlude section, like the din, and I was like, oh shit, like yes. And then I think we built through that, and everything kind of came together. Shield Brother was another interesting one because you, me, and Nick wrote the hell out of the song, and it just wasn't what Nick pictured. So he was like, I just have to sit on this for a bit. So he got it to where it is now with some of our contributions in there. But it was like I think it's the first ISENMOR song where he kind of just like, I think there was some sort of like ownership of the song where it's like, okay, I know how I want this to sound. Trust me, this is going to sound great. And then he got it through, and it's like, okay, yeah, this sounds pretty awesome.
Yeah, go ahead.
The third song that's interesting on Shield Brother is Sigurd's song, I think.
Right.
So Sigurd's song is 17 minutes long, and that's my fault because I love Green Carnation and everything they write. Well, they have Light of Day, Day of Darkness, which is an hour long, and that's kind of like my aspirational goal, right? If I can write an hour-long song.
That's good. That's the asterisk.
Yeah, that I don't despise. It's very important to me that if I do this, I don't despise the song. But like, I like long songs. I like getting like just lost in a song. So I kicked off Sigurd's song, and I think you made the comment that was like, this could be like our epic. I was like, all right, I can do it.
Oh yeah, it's one of those songs. There's another one. Who knows when it's actually going to be done? But there's another thing you've written where it starts and you go, "This is the beginning of a long song." You can just tell.
I think most of the things I write nowadays have like a dramatic intro. But yeah, I wrote the intro, and Tim listened to it and was like, this could be our epic. So I was like, all right, I'm going to make this as long as I can. And that one was interesting because I didn't hold that one close to my chest, but it became so massive that I think nobody in the band knew how to make constructive edits to it at a certain point. So what would tend to happen is that I'd work on it, and then I'd show it to the rest of the band, and they'd be like, this is boring, this isn't boring, like, this is cool, flesh that out more. And that worked. I know that you figured out the outro, right? Like,
well, what I liked about the outro ended up being like, I thought it was a little, I don't want to say sparse, but it was just kind of like, you know, it needed a little more. But then when Nick, no, it needed to be trimmed down. That's
right.
You know, it was just like, oh, it's just this for a while, you know, that kind of thing. But then Nick comes in with the lyrics, and there's actually not enough song for the lyrics. So it's just like jam packed with story.
Right.
And so if you read the lyrics, like lots happens in that last third of the song. And yeah, so it's just funny because originally I was like, there's too much space here, and it turns out there was maybe not enough, or it ended up being the exact right amount of space. But at the time it looked like, oh, we have to expand this more. But Nick made it work.
Yeah, and like lengthwise, I don't know that I want to push that song any longer than it is. I mean, it's pretty self-indulgent, right? To make a 17-minute long song. But I just decided we'd do it. We've gotten a decent response to it, which I've been pretty happy about. Especially since it's so kind of unconventional. And I don't know if that's just because the genre lends itself to doing shit like that. Or what. But one of the things I find really interesting about the song is I struggled the most with the second section. So it's kind of like 3 distinct sections, and then I guess like a reprise. So the first section is typically what we'll play live, and we'll just leave it at that. And then we have a second section which is really trimmed down, and it kind of has like an acoustic build. And then the third section is a little bit more kick-ass. So I wrote like the first and third sections, and I was like, yeah, these are pretty solid. But that second section I struggle with. And it ends up being that the second section is way stronger than I had originally thought while writing it.
Yeah, like the Guitar Pro doesn't really do it justice. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and the third section I think is the weakest part of the song. I still like it, but it's just not quite as dramatic as the rest. And it was not written to be that way, but it clearly isn't as dramatic, I think. But it's also interesting how you write something and you're like, yeah, this is, and then you put it down to paper. It's like, oh shit, this is like kind of much more awesome than I thought.
If you couldn't hear it, that's Mike patting himself on the back.
Just a smidge. Oh, I have tons of shit that I hate.
Speaking of shit that you hate, there's a lost song that was written for that album as well. So there was a song that was written and half the band liked it and the other half did not. So we actually decided to shelve it. And that was one of the first ones I picked back up after we got the album out.
Is this Meat of Poetry?
It is Meat of Poetry.
Okay.
Yeah. So, I think that's an interesting study because it's like we have this song that's done.
Yeah. We worked a lot on it.
Yeah, but it was not included with the album. And so the question then becomes, do you just pitch it for the next one, or do you fix it, or what? So it has been fixed, in quotes, but does that mean it's like good enough for the next album? And so who knows? We won't know, but I think it's better to overwrite and leave stuff off than to underwrite and have to fill the album. So, and the extreme version of that would be Metallica's Saint Anger sessions, when they wrote some ludicrous number of songs and then picked the best however many tracks are on Saint Anger, and they still suck. So
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh, boy. Yeah, so Shield Brother is definitely like Meat of Poetry was the only song we cut. And technically Saxon Shore kind of, and that was only because we recorded it as a single.
yeah. That had nothing to do with the songwriting aspect.
Yeah, that it was intended to go along with Shield Brother, but it ended up being we ended up doing a single of it just because we wanted to like prove out the sound, which was the idea of Daniel, who was in the band at the time. And I honestly, I think it ended up being a really good idea because after Saxon Shore came out, it was like I like the way this, like I like how we sound with this. Uh, so, uh, but yeah, we basically put everything that we had on Shield Brother. Um, there's still other stuff, but it was never intended to go on to Shield Brother. So I mean, I know that I've like I know we're sitting on like 12 minutes of one epic that may or may not. It has a similar problem to Shield or to Sigurd Song right now, where I think it's too large for anybody to constructively add to it at the moment. But then we've got a ton of shorter songs. One thing that I think is going to be very interesting is a lot more of the band. So Shield Brother and the EP was like, what's that?
Real quick, we had the. I just remembered we had the same situation for the Burning Shadows Beneath the Ruins. We wrote 5 songs and left one off because we're like, it's not quite there. So
Yeah,
now we're revisiting it and what's going to happen. So anyway, you were saying post Shield Brother songwriting.
yeah. So the EP and Shield Brother is all me, you, and Nick. And there's way more contribution from everybody this time around. There's a part of me that's worried about the style.
Oh, I mean that's absolutely a too many cooks.
Yeah, like
So when you're writing by committee, you have to not get butthurt when someone's like, I don't like this. So like that's the path you have to tread. You know,
Yeah.
which makes contrast that with RVG. I'm right the first time and no one's gonna change it. The end.
I know there have definitely been times when you were like, I think I'm going to work on the next RBG album, and I've been like, oh yeah, and I could tell you were like, it's just me. It's like okay, it's like
hey, there are songwriting credits that aren't mine.
I know. It's one of those things though where like I've done that too. Where it's like I'm going to work on this, and somebody else is like, really? And it's like
I'm gonna work
you. Yeah, I'm going to work on, which is totally fine, right? But like, yeah, it's going to be the next ISENMOR album is definitely going to be interesting. I haven't been able to contribute as much writing wise this time.
Why?
Why? Two guesses.
It's always those twins with you.
I know. But my gut is that we're going to write a shitload more and also shave off a shitload more.
Yeah, that's what
I think is going to happen.
People are going to be clamoring for our B-sides that sound nothing like the rest of the release. We got the ultra. There'll be fan club releases. There we go.
There we go.
Or we'll just change Saxon to Brains, and there'll be RVG songs.
There you go. But yeah, no, it is. I don't know. I find the topic endlessly fascinating. Just the topic of songwriting because it's so very individual for like anybody that I've talked to about it. And I think it can even differ between people for one. the same person in different bands. I mean, think about like Jesper Stromblad. The guy's like a writing machine, right?
Oh, one of my favorite things about Hammerfall is you can hear when they ran out of Jesper's material. If you just listen to the first 5 albums, you go, here's where they ran out of Jesper songs.
Yeah, but like, if you think about like, so he was Hammerfall and then In Flames. It's like they sound, pretty different. Oh, and Synergy. Synergy sounds very different than all of that too. But it's like even the same guy in a different context sounds just totally different. Meshuggah's writing process I find very interesting. Meshuggah, I don't think any of them live in the same country anymore, if I recall correctly. So they literally just like they riff on stuff and then email it to each other. You know what I mean? And then they now I think they need like when they play live, I think their clicks are like very complicated to support what they do. But yeah, they just completely are totally disconnected. Which I find pretty interesting as well. Speaking of which, let's see, this band. So you go into Metal Archives. Meshuggah, this band was accepted into the Metal Archives based solely on their early material, which is considered technical groove / thrash metal. So they don't like their later stuff, which I guess they consider djent.
Degent.
I take issue with this. So
I think it's DJ Ent.
The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, that's right.
Raves.
In the forest.
Yeah, that was nerdy. Beautiful. So if you listen to even later Meshuggah, I really don't think of it the same way I think of like, I don't know, it was a gent band.
I couldn't do it.
I'm trying to think of bands that suck. So I mean, okay,
call up Mark. He knows.
Yeah. Between the Buried and Me, no, they're not gent, but they do suck. What else? Sorry, I just wanted to talk shit on Between the Buried.
Oh man, anyone who's playing Mike Bingo is,
Sleep. No,
someone's gonna win.
No, sleep. No, they suck. They're not gent either.
Oh man. I think I'm gonna get. All right, so Google says Periphery, Veil of Maya, Vidhjarta, Tesseract, Animals. This sounds like Mark's playlist.
Yeah, it's definitely Mark's play. But Meshuggah really
loves
doesn't
DJ Ent.
Meshuggah doesn't really sound like Periphery, like other than like the staccato kind of like sort of riff shit that they do. So it's like they like pioneered the genre without really being the genre. So I don't agree with the assessment that they're now considered gent. It'd be like if you spawned like a craze and it's like, oh yeah, he's that fad. It's like it doesn't really count if he like made it up. Like it didn't exist and then now it does because of him. I don't know. Anyway, unrelated. I'm so sorry I talked all that shit about Between the Buried and Me, Sleep, and Electric Wizard. And Stoner Doom in general. I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me.
All right, well, I can't top that. So, to all the contestants, send in your Mike Bingo cards and we'll send a Podcast Them Down T-shirt to the earliest postmarked winner. So,
if you'd like to hear me talk shit on any other bands that you like, let me know. I'll probably find a way to be snobbish about it.
Snobbish? Oh man.
Snobbish.
All right. Well, do you have any final thoughts on songwriting?
No. I think I've waxed philosophic enough about it all.
Yeah, I guess my advice is find what works for you.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate definitive advice.
And what works for you might not work. Like RVG writes one way, Burning Shadows writes another way, ISENMOR writes another way, and just do whatever. There's no method to the there's no fixed process to make a song unless it's Manowar. All right, so thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Podcast Them Down. You can find Burning Shadows, ISENMOR, and recently vacated Rakes on Bandcamp, as well as Facebook, along with Fade to Black Metallica Tribute and Podcast Them Down itself. Until next time, keep it metal.
Okay, so songwriting Between the Buried and Me. Between the Buried and Me is a very interesting band. They're all extraordinarily talented musicians, right? They crush their instruments. They can write any song that they want. But the thing that Between the Buried and Me never does is ask whether they should do something. They do whatever they want, and they never question if it's a good idea. That is the primary problem with Between the Buried and Me. Have I ever had the desire to listen to a death metal song that then devolves into like Western whistling? No, but Between the Buried and Me doesn't really give a shit. They don't care. They're going to do it anyway because they can make it work even if it's the worst idea in the world. Fuck, man.